No one misses that in New York City, Mayor Bloomberg plowed under the little private library set up by these people under their own time and energy, while he's cutting library hours in the public libraries of New York City. The irony there is not lost on anyone.
Same thing in Oakland as well.
Yeah.
They're actually shutting down libraries. So in some ways it ties in with what you were talking about earlier, that there's no democracy in the workplace. In fact, many people observe that our Constitution ends when you go to work, right? And so now we're starting to see that the institutions of democracy are not working to allow people to feel like they can peacefully address their grievances about these things that are happening.
Now, basically, large corporations undid the New Deal. They undid all that legislation. They're in the process now of cutting back Social Security, as you mentioned. You know, as long as we leave the basic resources, economic wealth, in the hands of a tiny number of corporations, mega corporations, whose boards of directors and major shareholders call the tune, they will of course use the money to control politics. They will use the money in all these ways. And, you know, if we permit that, if we permit all the resources that we, the mass of people, actually produce to be concentrated in the hands of people who use it in this clearly anti-social way in terms of the mass of people, then in a sense we have only ourselves to blame that we haven't interceded in a situation that is not tolerable.
One thing that you take pride in is identifying yourself as using what we call class analysis, that you have studied Marxism and you use the tools that Marx left us, not as a sociologist or as a political economist. In fact, he critiqued political economists, but to use those tools to understand what's happening in our capitalist society and to try to change it. And I wonder if you might talk a little bit about somebody who's been getting also a lot of attention for his use of class analysis, David Harvey. And David Harvey has essentially been making a critique that what we've seen in the last 40 years is a form of neoliberalism. That really in brief, that Harvey's saying that in the last 40 years what we've seen is the use of tools of privatization and austerity and cutbacks, and a reduction of those democratic tools of grievance presenting in order to shift power. What do you think about this analysis, that understanding what happened in the last 40 years is about a shift in power, that the power that organized people were able to use to get a better deal or a larger share of the pie, or whatever you want to put it, in Social Security and these things we've been talking about? What do you think about that perspective? Is there any value in understanding this as a class struggle, if you will, over power?
Yes, I certainly agree with David Harvey that class is a central issue here. I guess where I would disagree a little bit is in the primacy he and others give to this question of the power. For me, it's an important part of the story, but A, it's only a part, and B, I think you understand the struggle over power, who has what power, as a outgrowth, as coming from the more fundamental, for me, issue of the economic organization, how production is done. Corporations have power because they receive into their hands the wealth of our society. You know, when you go to work, you produce goods and services from 9 to 5. At the end of the day, at 5 o'clock, you go home. The stuff you produce stays back. It's automatically the property of somebody else. You poured your muscle power into it. You poured your brain power. You made whatever it is, the software program, the hamburger, the haircut, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, you go home, and if you take any of that with you, you get punished. You have to learn, like a child in a kindergarten, that's not yours. You may have produced it, you may have poured yourself into it, but it belongs to somebody else, and you have to leave it. And you leave in the hands of a corporation, which is a tiny group of people compared to those who do the work, all the discretion about what to do with it. If they give themselves a lot of that wealth as personal income, which they do, if they pay their top executives fabulous income, which they do, then it becomes clear that to hold on to the benefits to them of this organization of economic life, they have to control politics. Because after all, what is American politics? We all go to vote. We all have a vote. It is possible that the mass of people looking at an economic system as undemocratic as this one, as beneficial to such a small number of people will come to the idea, let's use our political power to undo what is hurting us economically. The people who run the economic system, who get the benefit of all this, they're not stupid. They see that too. They better do something to neutralize the potential power people have politically. And the way they've done that is to use the wealth they get, the profits of their business, to control politics, to take over, as you put it, all the levers of power that they can, and to make the parties dependent on their money, to make the candidates dependent on their contribution, and to make the public discussion dependent on what countless think tanks and public relations enterprises do to shape the discourse. Who gets heard, who doesn't, who gets published, who doesn't, and all of that. And they work very hard to capture the levers of power, but it's in the interest of reproducing